Hello, everyone. Welcome to CloudEagle's SaaS Masterminds podcast. Today on the show, we have Kalyan Gummadam from Matterport. Welcome, Kalyan.
Thanks, Prasanna.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show with us today. Kalyan, for the benefit of our audience, would you kindly describe what you do at Matterport? And then we'll talk a bit more about what is procurement and SaaS. But first, let's start with you.
Sure. So before we get into that, Matterport's the leading digital twin company. When digital twin, we mean it's an AI camera tech firm. So nobody even close competition-wise there. For Matterport, I lead the indirect procurement. So I'm head of indirect procurement. I think we can talk about indirect versus direct at some point. And pretty much most of the heavy lifting on that side is on the SaaS side, optimizing the SaaS cost, portfolio stack, and everything.
Nice. Thanks for that, Kalyan. And before we get into all the serious stuff about SaaS and non-SaaS and also direct, indirect procurement, any fun fact you want to share about yourself?
Again, I don't know how much fun fact this is. It's more amusing to me, I think. So nowadays, as you know, Gen AI is all at the forefront of everything, and suppliers come in and say, have this AI tool or Gen AI tool. And then you can see that a lot in procurement. My thesis way back in 2001 from IIT here was in artificial neural networks. So I wrote code. I used back propagation algorithms, and I basically had an AI code run through, and the only folks who really understood at that point was me and my professor. And when I say that, people are like, really? I'm like, yes, So AI is nothing new. So that's a little bit of a fun fact, whatever. When I talk to suppliers, they kind of, really? I'm like, but yeah, that's where it is. So
nice. You're well ahead of the game in that case.
was probably, never know.
Nice. And Kalyan, a bit about your background. You have been working in procurement from quite some time. How did you get into this particular role, and how did you grow through the role?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, right? So I when I was finishing up my master's thesis, I was working on that. So GE kind of pulled me into it. So I was one of the early talent identification, as what GE used to call. So they pulled me into their design, advanced design program, and I said no, I don't want to do that. And they said, hey, you need to talk to somebody else if you want to do something else. And the first thing, my first internship that I ever did was in sourcing. I had no clue what that was. This was in August of 2000. So this is almost like 23 years ago. But I loved it. I never looked back. And it's never been a dull moment in my sourcing life. So I started with GE on sourcing, kind of did multiple rotations in supply chain manufacturing. And I was the technology sourcing director for the global sourcing leader for the technology portfolio for GE Healthcare. So done a lot of, post integration deals and acquisitions for GE Healthcare specifically, and I was mainly the procurement expert for those guys. Got my MBA from Booth after that, and then I was tapped into private equity. So that was the fortunate portion of it. So I did a lot of healthcare corporate piece, and then got pushed into private equity, where I did a lot of different industries you wouldn't even imagine. Which I think I've been very blessed with. So worked with a lot of defense contractors, manufacturing floors in Alabama, to groceries, to guns, to casinos, to banks, to healthcare. Nice. So a lot of different things. And then right now, as I said, I've always been aligned on the software side, but that wasn't the main focus. That was one thing I always wanted to do, come in and look at the whole software stack across all functions. And that is exactly what I'm looking at and doing right now at Matterport.
Nice. And when did you start with software sourcing?
Software sourcing, actually, my first, when I was a technology sourcing leader at GE Healthcare, one of my verticals was software sourcing. So, so I've seen the evolution of SaaS right from the get-go. When at that point, Microsoft and Oracle's were still there, but they were the licensed platforms and stuff. There was no SaaS per se. It was like embedded software or a standalone software. There's people in some normal garages using their own thing. So I was with software right from the get-go, and then kind of moved on, got back. So I had my ins and outs with software, and now I'm back. So
okay, got it. Nice. And Kalyan, right now you're doing indirect procurement. For the benefit of our audience, can you tell a bit about what is direct versus indirect procurement?
So, I mean, simply put, direct sourcing is something that you buy and actually you add a value to it and sell back to the customer. Indirect is everything that you procure for the company's operations. Majority of that is always like to run the company, whatever is needed for your office supplies, your facilities, your real estate, even SaaS, for example. If you're using a Slack or a Zoom or a Gmeet, you're not selling to the customers. So that's all indirect. That is basically the stuff that I procure or a procurement leader gets it for the operations of the company is all indirect sourcing.
Nice. And in indirect sourcing, is there a gray area where, let's say you're procuring software, but the customer support team is using it? So that is more customer facing, or the sales team is using it because they want to make more sales. So does that go into direct sourcing, or that is still considered indirect sourcing?
So there's always that little gray area, as you said. It's always tough, right? The moment if I am still using it, I'm not reselling it. You can always put that in the indirect bucket because I am paying for myself. I'm actually not paying for something else. So if I'm reselling it, then it kind of falls into that indirect bucket. But that said, you can go into the software development bucket where you might be selling something to the customer as an embedded piece, which might not be visible to the customer. That still is going to fall under indirect because you're procuring it for your company to see and sell the product. So there's always a little gray area though, unless, if you have to pay licensing for that or a customer as a reseller, as a third party. So there's always that little gray area where it might fall into that bucket. But usually we try to put that in the indirect bucket as long as it's used for the company and not resold to the customer.
Understood. Thanks for clarifying. Like, I think that is something which many people may not know what is direct, indirect, and these nuances, how they play out. Now, this segues into the next question, which is more about collaboration between the teams. Right now, you have the procurement team, then you have the finance team, then you have the IT team. But all of them at the end of the day will have a common goal, which is to cut down on SaaS spend software, or rather software spend right now, especially in this market, right? Is that a goal which your company is going towards right now? And a follow-up question for that is, how are you aligning all the teams?
Right. And I want to kind of a little bit reiterate and also be clear on something. I am talking on this podcast in a personal capacity. So let's not take anything from a professional standpoint, right? I'm not commenting as a Matterport spokesperson. That said, though, even before getting to Matterport, right, as an employee of the company, as an employee of a department, right, I think everyone should have the fiduciary responsibility of utilizing the money the right way. So when people always, the suppliers will look at it and say, hey, you want to cut, it's not about cutting the spend is the goal. It's about, are we allocating the dollars to the right areas? So that, it's for the best of the both worlds, right? For the suppliers as well as the customers. So I always go back to that fiduciary responsibility we have to make sure that we are spending the money in the right pockets. So again, the other way to look at that is, if it was your money, would you make that buy? Right. So back to that point, the goal is to, I would say, streamline and optimize the spend. So that we get the best bang for the buck. And also in the last 2, 3, 4 years, Prasanna, I would want to hear your perspective on this too, is I think there's been a lot of addition on the SaaS speeds. People have just been buying SaaS like there's no tomorrow, right? It's like, and when you look at it at the end of the day, you look at this whole massive portfolio of hundreds of SaaS offerings that you are using, and then you have to look at that and say, is that the right allocation of my money? So do I need to optimize it both from a price standpoint and even the platform itself? So, but have you seen that on your side too, or?
Yeah, absolutely, Kalyan. I think that is one of the main reasons why CloudEagle is also there. We have been tackling this problem of SaaS sprawl from quite some time. And it starts not at the executives level, it starts at the employee level where they want to explore few applications. Okay, let me try out these 3 trials and then let me go with one final application, right? They start with 3 trials, but they do not realize, or the systems are built in such a way that you should forget that you had subscribed for it, right? And they fall into that bucket. And after 3 months, everyone realizes there are 4 trials which are running from then, and no one knows about it because no one turned it off, because it's hard to turn it off. And this happens quite a lot. So this is one use case which we commonly see. The other one is people start procuring applications directly on the website and without even negotiating. They do not know that they can negotiate. most of these licenses if you just talk to the sales team, right? And then it spreads across. So both of them we are seeing, and that's something where we help identify and tackle.
No, absolutely. So that's, I think, the issue at hand. I think I talk to a lot of procurement leaders and IT leaders in the Valley and across the country as well. And that is the focus for a lot of people as to, hey, how do I optimize my portfolio and what is the right stack? So that's always going to be so if you talk into the detail for 24 and stuff, we should get into those.
Yeah, absolutely.
What the roadmap is.
Yeah. And Kalyan, how are you aligning these three functions to be working towards the same goal? Because each one of them might perceive it differently, right? Like the IT might be looking at it more from a license optimization, finance more from a dollar value that, okay, I want to cut down this much spend. Procurement may be thinking in terms of, okay, I can probably combine two applications and get it done in one, right? They're all talking the same, they're talking about the same thing, but they're all using different languages. So how do you get them to be aligned towards the same goal?
No, I mean, that's very well put, Prasanna. I think that's one thing when I talk to the other procurement leaders in the Bay as well, that's what they say as well. But I think I would add one more group to that, and that is going to be the business stakeholder or the department heads, whoever those are. So when you're looking at it, everybody has the right intention. Like, finance has a job to do, IT has a job to do, the department heads, they want to make sure that they have their dollars allocated for their platforms. And procurement at the end of the day comes in. I think that's where I always look at procurement as the glue to look at this and kind of run the conference across all these different functions. At the end of the day, we want to optimize it as we talked about it. Are we spending the money allocating it the right way? If we are not, then are there ways to look at it? The departments can be in a silo, and that's not right or wrong because they want to look at it from their department standpoint, right? And say, hey, I want to whatever their application is without taking any names. But we might be having 3 other applications because some other departments have also looked at it and they're using something else. They will not have that view, and they're not supposed to have that view because that's not their job to figure out what the other functions are doing. But that's where IT comes in, because that's where companies like you come in, because now once we start aggregating the data without an aggregator kind of tool, I would have to reach out to each one and say, hey, what are we using? What is our repository, right? What is our inventory of all these SaaS applications? And that is where IT would come in, like you said, and say, okay, I want to look at this from an optimization standpoint, from a utilization standpoint. Okay, if I bought 100 licenses, am I really using all that? And are those the right users to be even if they're 100 users, are those the right users? And back to finances, like, hey, always we'll look at please reduce the cost. And that's where I think procurement comes in as a glue to look at this, even forward looking on how do I optimize it for the right users, the right utilization, and the right stack. And that's where it's been very good so far. For me, it's been a fun ride because we look at it more constructively. And if something can be done right away, we said, hey, how do we optimize it next year? But everybody is aligned on that bigger goal, and arriving at consensus on that bigger goal is what we are trying to achieve.
Nice. That's a good segue again to our next question, to my next question, which is the bigger goal. For 2023, we are almost there at the end right now. But what are your plans for 2024? What do you envision in terms of SaaS spend management, or do you envision procuring more applications? There is something else happening. How are you planning out the next year? What are your main goals for next year?
And again, one thing at my company, at least, we can say that, as a company, we have a huge consensus. We have huge leadership support on using the right tools that are needed for the benefit of the productivity of the company or the department. And that said, there's also a huge focus on the optimization and making sure that we are allocating the dollars the right way. So we did a lot of, I would say, optimization per se at the individual application level, from a price standpoint, utilization standpoint, or are we having the right set of licenses? Majority of that has been done. That said, now we're going to look at this little bit as a category roadmap kind of view for the next year, looking at every single function, looking at that stack. function-wise, department-wise, and say, hey, if it's a sales ops or is it customer, is it HR, is it finance, what is my tech stack there? Is that the right tech stack for us, right? And if it is, we are going to look at optimizing it and picking the strategic partners for the long run and figuring out if we have to go for alternatives to replace some of those. So the focus for 2024 will be huge on optimization of the stack. And it doesn't mean people have this wrong impression when I say optimization, like, oh, you're going to cut down stuff. Yes, we will probably walk away from some of those deals. Doesn't mean that we will not be getting in new tools or we're going to consolidate. So we're going to look at what is the right partnership from a SaaS standpoint and kind of align with that. So we might be adding a few. We will be actually taking off for a few and we'll be consolidating a few. So the focus is mostly kind of a full-on stack consolidation across all departments.
Okay, that's great to hear. And it's good to hear that you're not just talking about stack consolidation, which a lot of people talk about, but you went into specifics that sales stack consolidation, marketing stack consolidation. I think that's something which people miss out, that they're like, okay, let me consolidate everything, which is the highest spend, let's cut down, right? The highest spend may not be the one which you want to cut down. That may be the right tool for that particular function, sales function, right? So you'll have to go into each of the stack and then identify it. And can I go a bit more granular on asking you, how are you planning to do that?
Again, as I said, right, that we are having these planning sessions. We talk to the department heads and understanding what we have. But that said, once you have the high-level view of everything, like, okay, let's say, hypothetical number without talking too much. I have 200 SaaS applications in my company. Now, once I start segmenting them into each one of those verticals, as we talked about, sales, marketing, HR, finance, and stuff, then you have to look at, and you'll be surprised and as to, hey, why am I using 2 or 3 applications in the same tech stack, right? And then maybe that particular application might be useful to some other function, be it customer success, we have customer ops as well, the call center stuff, and then you have even finance and accounting. So you can look at that. Once you get that view, now the question is there a way to optimize and take one of those applications out and get the new one in? So we are actually having the discussions at that level, at the individual function level, and saying, is this the right one? And that said, also, we need to be careful about being captive to a particular ecosystem, if you will, and say, is this what we want to build the company on, right? So there's multiple things that come into play on how we are looking at it. So we are actually going it at that level. And then picking the right strategic partners and say, okay, fine. And then you will look at it and say, these are strategic partners, or these I have to live with. These I have to really get out of. And some that, absolutely, I can do nothing about it because I'm captive. So there's a difference between strategic vendor and captive vendor. Your captive can be strategic too, but you'll have to differentiate between those two, because some of these, based on how you're structured, if you're captive, you are captive. It can still be strategic. But identifying those in those functional silos, and then coming out and trying to acknowledge and say, oh, okay, now I can reduce the stack and actually pick the right stack for you to grow. And this is actually very important for companies that scale, because the more you scale, the more you would really want to be on the right stack.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kalyan, for going into the details about how are you planning to implement this. That's really great to hear. I know we are on time right now. Any final thoughts, 1 or 2 minutes, which you want to share with the team on how you are planning to continue doing this with respect to sourcing and getting your team aligned?
No, again, I would say, reach out to your networks, talk to companies, and you guys are doing a terrific job. And I like the product very well as well. It gives you the full view of what's going on in the company. And that is very important to understand. More than coming in with the approach of, I need to optimize, understand what the data is first, right? I mean, what am I doing? What is my company doing? What is my stack look like? Once you have a good understanding of that, that is when I think you will start to dig into it and say, what is important, what is not, what can you do, what is what you cannot. Because you can't come in, like you said, and say, hey, I'm going to take my top vendor out. You can't. Sometimes you're absolutely captive to them. So that is one piece. And the other piece I'm really fascinated and also concerned or excited about, multiple mixed feelings, is the Gen AI portion. Because every SaaS company pretty much is coming with their Gen AI piece. And now that adds on 2 pieces. One, is it the right thing from a dollars and productivity standpoint. Second, the InfoSec piece. So those are the two aspects which are also getting right front and center as we go into 24.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kalyan. Thanks for the kind words and your final thoughts on that front. It was great chatting with you. And thank you for being on our show here today. So with that, everyone, thank you for joining us at CloudEagle's SaaS Masterminds podcast. We had a great conversation today with Kalyan from Matterport. Hope you enjoyed the show as much as we did. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kalyan.
Thank you. Yeah, bye.